HP Hollow here, and I am back with a new book coming out on Thursday of this week, which is Monster Punk Horizon 2 Isekai Skies. The response to Monster Punk Horizon 1 has just been fabulous, you guys. The responses have been beyond anything I could have expected or imagined, and so I am really eager to see what those of you who enjoyed Monster Punk 1 think of Monster Punk 2. Obligatory buy my book part. The ebook is already up for pre-order on Amazon if that's your jam. The audiobook is in the works. I actually approved it just late last week, so we're just waiting on Audible right now. The paperback, if you prefer paperback, is actually already out, so you can go ahead and grab that on Amazon. But all the real magic happens this week, Thursday, November 18th. The book releases. We'll be doing a virtual launch party wherein you can hear some excerpts and also win some stuff. So if you can't watch any of my other videos this week, watch that one. It's going to be at 8 o'clock on YouTube and Facebook and on Twitch, and it'll be a blast. We had a blast last time, and I expect much of the same this time. Now, a little bit about Monster Punk 2 itself. Isekai Skies reads a little differently from Book 1 in that, in terms of world building, Book 1 kind of throws the reader in and expects you to learn how to swim on your own. It's very fast-paced, very frenetic, and I kind of did that intentionally because Monster Punk is frankly a nutty series. It's very hyperactive, very fast-paced. The one review that described it as a Monster Hunter Sugar Rush is not lying. The reviewer that described it as like reading a cupcake made entirely of chocolate chips is not lying. And so I threw the reader in just to let them know, hey, if hyperactive writing is not your jam, this is probably not the series for you. But for Book 2, I did realize that the reader does need to breathe occasionally. And so, Book 2 slows the pacing down a little bit, and it does that by introducing a character who is not native to the world under the dazzling skies. Another reason why I didn't write this book first is because I didn't want to set up the main character of this book as the main character for the series. Though the series develops an ensemble cast, I ultimately wanted Pix and Jaz to be significant in every single story, whether they're the main characters of the story or sort of in the significant periphery as they are in this one. And so having them be the main characters of Book 1 set that up pretty effortlessly. Now, on to the main characters and concepts in Book 2. Now, around the time I started writing this book, my husband and I were beginning to get into Isekai anime, and for those who haven't heard the term before, Isekai refers to a story in which the main character gets pulled out of their universe into another universe and they have to learn to deal. And it's sort of a variant of portal fantasy, but one thing I've noticed about Isekai anime is that the character always gets pulled in, or most of the time, gets pulled into a world that has video game trappings like measurable stats. Like, some will literally have screens they can pull up in their consciousness to be able to access their stats. So in a way, it's kind of distinct from standard portal fantasy. Now, I had watched some Isekai anime before this point, and hadn't really enjoyed it that much just because of the shows that I'd experienced. The video game element didn't really seem necessary to the story. It just seemed like a standard fantasy where occasionally the main characters looked at stats. And it struck me as lazy storytelling. But then my husband introduced me to the anime Overlord. And Overlord was the show that convinced me that Isekai can actually be a pretty brilliant genre. That's primarily because most of the gaming-themed anime I'd watched up until that point never really acknowledged gamer culture and the unique, weird little communities that build up around certain games, and in the case of Overlord, specific MMOs. And Overlord acknowledged that with panache. Even though the main character doesn't have access to his fellow gamers in the setting he's pulled into, he's constantly hearkening back to things they did in the world, especially ridiculous things. In fact, the DNA of his fellow players is very much inside the world they built and the world he inhabits in this fantasy setting. And the climax of the first season is especially wonderful because he has to draw upon things they created and things they collected in their time playing this game to defeat the season's big bad. And it's really well done, and I love it to death. And that was the thing that convinced me that Isekai was a legit genre and worth continuing in. And so then we got into Rising of the Shield Hero and every other Isekai that came out around that time, and the rest is history. Now, with the Monster Punk series, I hadn't necessarily started out wanting to write an isekai story, but when I set the world up to basically be defined by a whole bunch of portals in the sky dropping stuff, it seemed very natural to have some of those stories be about people who fell from the dazzling skies and had to learn to survive under them. And so we get Kaito, who is the main character of this book. Now, Kaito is from a far future version of our world. When we first meet him, he's having some cosplay adventures at WyvernCon, which is absolutely not a ripoff of DragonCon. And his girlfriend is there, he's proposed to her, she said yes, and then the floor opens under him, and suddenly he's falling through the air and landing in the middle of a setting that looks like it's been ripped from a weird, off-kilter version of his unnamed but heavily implied favorite video game series. So, Easter eggs galore with this character. Now, Kaito is not your standard isekai transplant, primarily because of the world he comes from. He's accustomed to having access to stats in a certain form. In his setting, pretty much everyone has these little nanites running through them that are constantly giving them data and feedback on their own body, like, oh, you're experiencing this, therefore you need to eat this. This is happening, therefore you need to take this medicine, etc. And so while he's not accustomed to video game style stats, he's very much accustomed to having a lot of information about himself and about, to a certain extent, what he's capable of. Well, when he falls through the dazzling skies, he loses that. One thing he learns very quickly is that whenever anything falls through the dazzling skies, or rather any electronic equipment, it fries. So he has no access to his nanites, and he panics because he basically has to learn how to navigate a world without all this significant input that he's used to. And initially he's kind of like, okay, well, what do I do? How do I navigate this world? But it turns out that he and his girlfriend are also fans of isekai anime. His girlfriend more so than him, and he's like, you know what, it seems like I've been isekai'd. May as well follow some isekai tropes and see if that helps me in this situation. And so part of his struggle is figuring out how much of this setting is standard isekai and how much is the not very fun parts of reality that he has to get used to. It's also sort of reverse lit RPG in that the main character is accustomed to having stats, but then suddenly doesn't have them. And that's something that I did intentionally. Whenever I read lit RPG, I always skip the stats, because I hate numbers. And so I figured if I skip the stats, there's probably other readers who skip the stats too, so I'm just not going to write them. And I do have to say that while I never really planned on writing an isekai novel, I did have a whole lot of fun playing around with isekai tropes. One of my favorite tropes, for example, is that every time a hero gets isekai'd, there's usually some sort of goddess or equivalent hot female to greet him to the world and explain what's going on and what his new position is. And the native characters in the setting, the characters that are native under the dazzling skies, they have some concept of what isekai is, but it's primarily because they're accustomed to getting people who, the moment they wake up after they've fallen from the sky, wake up and say things like, oh my gosh, have I been isekai'd? And so they tend to think of these characters as the isekais. It's like, oh, we've got another isekai. And over the years, they've learned some isekai tropes from questions that these characters have asked. And so whenever they learn of the goddess trope, for example, the first thing they think to do with it is to play a prank on the new isekai. And so in this setting, every time a new isekai, hello, Nova, I think? Anyway, the goddess trope is definitely one these characters have latched onto. So what they do is, every time an isekai falls from the sky, they enlist Jaz to be the goddess that greets the isekai. But she's never the same goddess. They have her selected by choosing from a box of cards that fell from the sky. Very distinct black cards with white lettering and white cards with black lettering that readers will recognize as Cards Against Humanity. So in the past, she has been the goddess of some very intriguing things. And naturally, Kaito finds her utterly bewildering, as he does most of the setting. But thankfully, level-headed Pix is there, and though she ruins the prank for everyone else, she basically decides that they're gonna take him under their wings and teach him how to survive in this world. And so what you get is a sort of tutorial mode story of this character learning his way around this new world, learning how, even though he doesn't have stats to deal with, learning how he can improve himself so that he can survive and thrive in this world, so that he can eventually get back through the portal. See, one of the things of this setting is that the main characters, they've tried in the past, but they haven't found a way to get back through the portals. And Kaito is the sort where he is very much a foil for most of the rest of the cast, and that everyone else is kind of ridiculous. Okay, everyone else is a lot ridiculous, but Kaito is the sort who, somewhat like Pix, likes to sit down and reason and think his way through things, and he very much becomes an essential part of the cast because of that. Because while he's still very new to the world, you get the impression that he's the kind of character who pieces ideas together very well, and as a result can take all these disparate pieces of information that the other characters have gathered and be able to put them in an order that makes sense and that reveals new bits of information about the world. Or rather, will reveal, because that's more of a later series thing, but the basic seeds are laid in this book. So, now you have a bit more of an idea of what to expect from Isekai Skies. I'm really eager to share it with you guys. My earlier viewers have enjoyed it a lot. A lot of them have enjoyed it more than the first book, which is yay! But it's a wild adventure. It is definitely wilder than the first book in ways I haven't even described yet. If you do want to hear a little bit more about it, I'm going to be doing readings and various other things this week. Again, the launch party is going to be Thursday evening at 8 o'clock, so you should totally join us for that. I'll be giving away signed copies of Isekai Skies, and for some special viewers, signed copies of the next book in the series, which will release December 23rd. So plenty of reasons to watch stuff this week. Once again, if you're the pre-ordering sort, the ebook is already up for pre-order on Amazon. It'll be coming to Kindle Unlimited. The audio version will be out whenever Audible releases it, but it has been approved. And also the paperback is already out if you'd like to read an early copy. And so plenty of ways to experience this story. I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it. And overall, thank you for watching my video, and I hope to see more of you later this week. Bye. Oh wait, before we do the official goodbye, Nova says hey.